Yo, what's shaking, everybody? It's time for another edition of the OrangeBloods Texas football channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined today by Anwar Richardson. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We will take both. We're talking a little Texas football recruiting with all due respect to the Texas football season, which does kick off a little more than 48 hours from now, Anwar. We'll do a big OrangeBloods modcast tomorrow that everyone will be able to watch right here on the channels where our programming launches from. But today, focusing on recruiting, the Longhorns pick up a commitment. They dip into the state of California and they pick up Owen Carey, an outside linebacker, really just a linebacker from Santa Ana, California. He's from Mater Dei High School, one of the real powerhouse programs of the state of California, which obviously is one of the most important recruiting hotbeds in the state of California. And at the same time, the Longhorns are starting to prepare for, I think, the potential loss of Bryce Anderson, the long-time target at safety, who has twice been on the verge of committing to the Longhorns, only to push it back. He's one of really the top 4 or 5 most critical prospects still left on the board. He announces yesterday that he's going to make an announcement on Friday. Anticipation being that after being a Longhorn lean for so long, that he's going to end up at Texas A&M. So it makes today a little bit of a recruiting dominant conversation. Longhorns gain a commitment and at the same time seem to be on the verge of a commitment, or losing a commitment rather. And I guess the thing that I would say to you as I toss it to you for like an opening thought, it feels like Texas fans are still struggling to come to grips with a lot of the things that you and I have been talking about all summer, which is this team has to win, and that there's a bit of a messaging problem that they have right now that makes it hard for them to win big-time elite prospects unless they win on the field. It just makes everything they do going into this season really critically important. But I think a lot of Texas fans are still struggling with this idea that it's just not happening right now in recruiting at the highest level. With all due respect to Carey, the commitment they pick up today, the bigger conversation kind of still centers around this idea that they're just not yet closing on the elite kids in the state of Texas.
Yeah, Ketch, I remember one of our last conversations and we talked about Bryce Anderson. And I think one of the things that you had brought up when we had talked about him was, hey, if this guy wanted to commit to Texas, he could have done that. He's had multiple opportunities to do that and did not do that. And Bryce, I previously asked you, like, who were like the most important guys that were left? And I know Bryce was really top of the board. And I think there was like maybe 5 other, maybe it's like 5 other guys. And you had said like essentially they needed to nail just about all of them for that to happen, or at least 5 out of the 6. I know
that was to get a top 10 class.
Okay. So it was like 5 out of 6 guys, correct, Ketch?
Right. And one of the 6 already fell off. The commitment of Kelvin Banks to Oregon made that number drop from 6 to 5. And now you're talking about, Campbell, the offensive lineman, who is probably the single most important prospect for the Longhorns. Denver Harris, Bryce Anderson, Brenen Thompson, Evan Stewart. Like, the list has gotten smaller. And if Stewart commits on Friday to Texas A&M, Texas would be in a position where I said, look, in order for this class to really meet a basic level of standards that I think a lot of people had for Sarkisian in recruiting in his first full year, they need to sweep the board of these 6 or get at least, you got to get 5 out of 6. Just mathematically, if you want to have a top 10 class-ish kind of a thing. And this might have even been top 5 at the time. Like, what would it take to get to a top 5? You've got to get 3 or 4 5 stars. Here are the guys that remain that you can do. If they don't get Anderson, which I think is expected at this point on Friday, now you're down to 4 of the in-state kids. And you're not going to likely get all those 4 either. So what started as in order to hit the benchmark that I think Texas fans had from an expectation standpoint, you're going to have to get 5 of 6, maybe 6 of 6. Now, of those 6, the first 2 would have already made announcements. You didn't get either. And it starts to, I think, put into perspective that this doesn't look like a recruiting class that's going to have a lot of what Mac Brown would have called war daddies back in the day, the guys that truly change programs immediately. This program under Sarkisian is going to be a lot about development early on and not about, I think, flashy recruiting rankings. And that's not what people thought when he started, but that's where we are 8 months going into this thing.
Well, because there's a couple of different things at play, right? The main one of the reasons why Tom Herman was fired was because of recruiting, right? We've talked about lose. I think even your 10 thoughts from the weekend when we talked about them losing Quinn Ewers and how that was horrible, but the Brockermeyers was basically like the death blow at that point, and where they say, okay, we've got to get recruiting jump started. And, we've seen coaches that have gotten first-year bumps and been given the benefit of the doubt. Charlie Strong was given the benefit of the doubt, Ketch, after, struggling, initially. Tom Herman was
after a bad season.
Yeah, 6 wins. And he still got the benefit of the doubt. Tom Herman, again, in year 1 in this transition class, and then all of a sudden they put together top 5 back-to-back classes. And so you're thinking like, okay, at Texas, every coach gets the benefit of the doubt. You expected the guys to come in from this Alabama staff and have the benefit of the doubt. And what you're still seeing is guys are saying, okay, that was cool what you guys did there. But we're talking about the elite guys. Okay. We're not talking about anybody else, no disrespect to anyone else. The elite guys are saying there's still better options. There's options out there that don't mean as much. And so, yeah, you're having a class, Catch. You would have to tell me if you think there's a possibility this thing even finishes in the top 10. I don't know what the math looks like, but it does become at this point, you've got to win on the field and then kick the can down the road is because seemingly what we're going to have to do and kick the can. And I've heard this, if it's like, if you build it, they will come, well, if you win, they will come. I mean, do you even see a top 10 class in the future for 2022?
For 2022, it's going to be, I think it'll be close. I think that I would probably put Texas somewhere between 11 and 15 if I had to guess right now. Those classes are typically inflated by a lot of the low 4 stars. Like, they signed 12 or 13 4 stars, but those won't be elite. I mean, Texas has one national top 150 commitment right now. So, it's hard to build a top 10 class when you're not signing really any elite prospects. I mean, whatever Malik Murphy is right now in this class, he is the highest rated, best commitment in this class. I think the original thought would have been that Malik Murphy was going to be one of a bunch of guys in this class. And, I still think they've got a very good chance of getting Evan Stewart. I still think they get a chance of getting DJ Campbell, the 5-star offensive lineman. So there's 2 5-star kids right there. I mean, but they have to close first. And there's no getting around the fact that both of those kids are taking a little bit of a wait and see attitude with Texas. Evan Stewart's not going to commit to Texas if the offense doesn't look good. I don't know that there's a 1-loss record associated with him because I really think the way the offense looks matters as much as anything. But, Campbell may make his decision between Texas and Oklahoma when it's all said and done. And if he's waiting to see what both teams look like on the field, just for, as a small thing that makes a piece of his decision, then, how those 2 things look side by side will matter. I think that without rehashing everything that we've talked about in the past, and I would say go explore our YouTube channel if you want to get some really headfirst deep into the recruiting talk. We go on and on and on all summer long about this topic. So I want to be careful not to completely rehash everything that we've said before, but they're just in a position where this is almost about 2023 as much as 2022. And that if you want to get Arch Manning and you want recruiting to, I don't want to say 2022 is a lost cause, but I don't know that there's a pathway to a top 5 class. I don't. And quite frankly, for me, a top 10 class is basically the same thing as a number 20 class. There's not a lot of true value that I think you can quantify from being ranked 10th. I think it sounds good. I love a good top 10 list, but in recruiting, if you're 10th, you're really 20th or 25th. The difference is the margins in quality in those classes versus each other just is way less significant than 5 versus 10. There's a bigger drop off between 5 and 10 than there is from 10 to 20. And so I think at that point, I think there's a real conversation to be had about at what point does Sark potentially start saving scholarships for transfers, and whether or not what's available in the portal is better than what is available in recruiting. And that brings us, let's transition to the commitment that the Longhorns got. We haven't really spent any time talking about Carey, the linebacker from California. He's an interesting kid. He hasn't been playing football for a long time. I think he's been playing football for a couple of years. This will be year 3 in the state of California. They just go through this thing where their junior season was just played in January and February. We know with Malik Murphy that it made for an unconventional year of development. He's not a national prospect. He is I believe Texas was his 12th offer. Arizona, Boston College, Colorado State, Columbia, Howard, Nevada, Penn, Tulane, UCLA, Yale. I mean, the offers that will jump out at you, Anwar, are the scholastic offers.
Correct.
I mean, other than UCLA and Colorado, it was like, oh, Columbia, oh, Penn or Yale. So this is a kid with Ivy League smarts. He's a pretty good athlete. I mean, look, he's not a national top 75 kid. So I think at that point you have to just stop. You have to untrain yourself to care about whether he's a high 3-star or a low 4-star. To me, he goes into this group of kids that are all kind of projects to some extent. And he's a guy that I think needs some time to develop. I don't know that he fits. You know, there's some talk that Texas wants him as an inside linebacker. When I watch him on film, I don't see an inside linebacker. So I think that Pete Kwiatkowski would really and Jeff Choate would have to really, this guy's going to need some time to develop. But, 4.59 laser time 40. I think he's got a reported 36-inch vertical. You don't see him really stop and start explosive. He's not a burst guy as an athlete. I think he's a good athlete. I see why he's a 3-star guy. But if you're Texas, and this is a chance to put a flagpole up at Mater Dei High School, where while Sarkisian is the head coach at Texas, you're going to want to go back in to Mater Dei. That's a high school that you're almost certainly going to be in every single year. Just checking. They've always got kids. I mean, this is a chance for the Longhorns to, after losing Brew McCoy, who was the only Mater Dei kid that Texas has ever signed, now they have another guy that they can start to build what they hope, I think, would be an eventual Mater Dei pipeline. So I think there are some residuals to getting a commitment from Carey. And he's a good, solid pickup. I think that we'll look back on this Texas class and say there's a lot of good, solid football players in this class. They're probably the type, though, that take a few years to develop before you're going to get the most out of them. And that's not how Texas traditionally trains itself to view their recruiting classes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Ketch, because like you said, you talk about a guy who hasn't played a lot. You talked about Malik Murphy, who hasn't played. You got a running back, not playing as in the senior year, even though he's already established. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with these guys and their development, going forward. And I mean, I guess this is one of those situations where, I don't know where he was on their board, and I guess it's one of those. This is going to be we trust our own evaluations kind of things, right? Because you always hear about trusting your own evaluation when you're laying outside the top 10, and then within it, it's always about everything that's been going great and good. So I'll be interested to see how he grows and develops. And I mean, the last thing I'll say, Ketch, is if you alluded to something. And you said, hey, if you were Sarkisian, you start saving scholarships. I mean, who are the priority guys that you want to try to get? And how many more guys do you think he should try to get in this class?
Well, I think this is its own YouTube show. Its own, I think there's a show here, because I think the conversation is an interesting one. It is. Let's take a guy like Carey for example, okay? Because ultimately, what you and I are going to have a conversation about is, where do you arbitrarily decide that one thing has a more quantifiable advantage in terms of its value? So when we look at a prospect like Carey, if you're talking about anything that's a low 4-star or below, so high 3-star, mid 3-star, low 3-star, you're getting to a point where, as a prospect, your hit ratio for becoming an eventual NFL player is less than 20%. Sometimes, depending on the player and where that player comes from, it's significantly lower than 20%. Carey, as a mid 3-star player, probably comes with a 90% miss rate with regards to developing into an NFL player. Statistically, across the country, that's what players at that level project at. If we viewed him as a low 4-star, that number instead of 90 is 80. But, again, fairly narrow margins given how high of a miss rate we're talking about. The question is, if you're taking a transfer, a guy that has proven himself at the collegiate level, a guy like Devin Richardson, what do you think of a guy who's got 2 or 3 years of eligibility left, where he's proven himself as a college athlete? What do we think his hit failure rate looks like mathematically versus that of a high school prospect with a profile like Carey's? I mean, I think you could argue pretty strongly that you should be leaning into the transfers. I just don't know where the starting point for that is. And it flies in the face of everything that coaches have trained themselves to believe. Coaches have always believed that the high school prospect is more valuable, that, it's a little bit like baseball, where the prospects are worth more than players. But they have always believed that the guy with 4 or 5 years of eligibility coming to the high school level is by itself a more valuable thing than most transfers. And I don't know that I believe that. I don't know that if the conversation just came down to a Carey versus Richardson and who you think has the greatest chance for making an impact, I feel like watching a guy like Devin Richardson, even at New Mexico State for a year. I mean, I've watched that guy play against Alabama. I feel like I go, okay, I don't even know how to quantify what that percentage is, but I think there is a more favorable return than the high school prospects that are currently available once you get beyond the names that we've already mentioned in this show. Once you get beyond Evan Stewart, once you get beyond DJ Campbell or Denver Harris or Bryce Anderson, there gets to be a point where I think Texas has to decide where the value is. And I personally don't have that answer yet. I don't know. But I know that when you start getting into 3-stars, I think you can point towards the transfers being a little bit more valuable, but I don't know that Steve Sarkisian and his staff will see it that way at all.
You said a mouthful. I got nothing else, Ketch.
I'll end it on that mouthful. Look, we've got full analysis of Owen Carey over at OrangeBloods.com. Go check out my instant analysis. check out all of the film and the video and the highlights and get a feeling for exactly what Texas picked up from a commitment standpoint. Really raw and athletic kid with a lot of upside, but a guy that, you know, I think having offered in July, you know, it's a bit of a snapshot of where things stand right now on the recruiting side of things. But Carey was ready to jump on a Texas offer and becomes a really critical piece of this puzzle on the defensive side of the ball. Again, full coverage over at OrangeBloods.com. We'll have the modcast tomorrow. Give us a like, hit the subscribe button. Until then, you guys be good to each other. We'll talk to you later. See you.